September 27th, 2025. The sun drops low over the South Australian outback. The temperature starts to ease from the day's heat. At a remote sheep station roughly 250 kilometers north of Adelaide, a grandmother steps outside to call a 4-year-old boy in for the evening. He is not there. He was there 30 minutes ago. She saw him. She says she watched him playing on a mound of dirt just outside the homestead, like he had done 100 times before. No stranger had come up the road. No unfamiliar vehicle had raised a cloud of dust. No gate had been opened that wasn't supposed to be. And still, in the time it takes to finish an afternoon cup of tea, a child who had no reason to be anywhere else was simply gone. That detail, the 30 minutes, is where this story begins. It is also, as you will come to understand, where many of the questions refuse to end. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss what comes next. The property is called Ridgeback Station in this account. It sits in a part of Australia that most people only ever see from the window of a plane, if they happen to be looking down at exactly the right moment. Red earth, scrubby, heat-bleached vegetation, mine shafts sunk decades ago and never properly fenced, dry creek beds, dams built to hold whatever rain occasionally falls. The nearest town is a 40-minute drive away, and on a quiet afternoon, there are no sounds out there except wind and insects and the occasional distant movement of sheep. It is the kind of place where you know who belongs and who doesn't. Dust tells you when a vehicle is coming long before the vehicle arrives. The nearest neighbors are themselves isolated. Everyone in the district knows everyone else. That's not a romantic description. It's a practical fact that becomes important later, because it means that the arrival of a stranger would not have gone unnoticed. The boy we'll call Noah Carter was 4 years old. He had been described by the people who loved him as shy but curious, the kind of child who liked to explore the edges of familiar spaces without wandering too far beyond them. He lived at Ridgeback Station temporarily, staying there with his mother, Ellen Carter, while she and his father, Marcus Carter, worked through a separation. They had been apart for only a short time. The arrangement was recent and, by all accounts, amicable. Ellen had grown up on this property. Her parents, Robert and Diane Walsh, owned and ran it. She knew it the way you only know a place when you've spent your whole childhood on it. That Saturday evening, Marcus Carter was not at the property. He was elsewhere at a distance, and would later be confirmed by investigators as having had nothing to do with what happened. Noah's grandmother, Diane Walsh, was the last person to see him. She has said consistently that she saw him playing near the homestead at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. She says that at 5:30 she went to bring him inside, and he was not where she had left him. The family then searched for 3 hours before they called the police. That 3-hour delay is not a crime. Parents and grandparents panic. They search. They call out. They walk in circles through familiar ground, convinced the child is about to appear around the next corner. It happens. It is human and understandable. But that detail, 3 hours, was one of the first things investigators noted, because in the Australian outback, in the fading light of an early spring evening, 3 hours is an enormous amount of time. It would have been dark by then. The temperature would have dropped. And a 4-year-old in a blue long-sleeved shirt, gray hat, and boots would have been somewhere in roughly 500 square kilometers of open, inhospitable country. When police arrived and deployed a helicopter with infrared capability that same night, they found nothing. Not a heat signature. Not a footprint on the track. Nothing at all. The next morning, the search began in earnest. South Australian police expanded their efforts rapidly, pulling in resources that would eventually make this the largest missing person search in the state's recorded history. The numbers are staggering when you hear them. Over 160 police officers from across the state, 230 additional personnel, including volunteers and military, 48 members of the Australian Defence Force in the first week alone, Aboriginal trackers, drone units equipped with thermal imaging, a mounted unit, all-terrain vehicles, a police dive team, all of it deployed to find one small boy on a 60,000-hectare property. In the first 10 days, they searched an area roughly equivalent to 47,000 hectares of ground. They covered it on foot, on horseback, in the air. They searched creek beds and gullies and scrubs so thick in places that visibility dropped to almost nothing. They found nothing that belonged to Noah. No clothing, no footprints that could be confirmed as his, no sign that it passed through any part of the country they covered. That absence, the complete absence of any physical trace, is one of the defining features of this case, and one of the things that investigators will return to repeatedly over the following months. In most missing child cases, even the tragic ones, you find something: a shoe, a piece of clothing caught on a fence, a footprint in soft earth near a water source. Children, when they wander, leave a trail. They get tired. They sit down. They disturb the ground in ways that trained eyes and dogs and drones can detect. Here, in 500 square kilometers of fine outback dust and dry vegetation, ground that holds impressions, well, there was nothing. At this point, investigators were left with two possibilities. Which one would you have believed? The first was that Noah Carter had wandered off the property and become lost in the surrounding country. The second was something else entirely, something no one in the family or the community wanted to say out loud. For now, police publicly maintained the first theory. It was reasonable. It was the most common explanation for a child missing from a remote property. Children fall into mine shafts. They wander to water. They get disoriented in country that all looks the same to a 4-year-old. The explanation had precedent, and it was the one that allowed everyone, investigators, family, the community watching from a distance, to keep hoping. The search was scaled back after 10 days. That's when the first quiet shift happened. The case was transferred to the Missing Persons Investigation section of South Australian Police. On its face, that sounds like a routine administrative step, a handoff from a search and rescue operation to an ongoing inquiry. But inside the language of how police communicate, it was a signal. The urgency of a live search was being replaced by the slower, more deliberate architecture of an investigation. A second search launched 4 days later, this time focused on a tighter radius around the homestead itself, the 5 or 6 kilometers immediately surrounding the property's main structures. 80 personnel, 33 vehicles, drones, 2 weeks of searching, and still nothing belonging to Noah Carter was found. A third search was launched at the end of October. This time, investigators turned their attention to a dam located roughly 600 meters from the homestead, the place where a small boy might naturally wander toward water. They drained it, 3.2 million liters of water, pumped out under police supervision, the bottom inspected by divers, the surrounding area scanned for heat signatures and anomalies. Nothing. A fourth search in late November targeted 6 previously unidentified mine shafts on the property and surrounding land, located between 5 and 12 kilometers from a homestead. Some were shallow enough to inspect visually. Others were 20 meters deep and required specialized equipment. Police had not previously known these shafts existed. Every one of them was searched thoroughly. Nothing. By this point, and this is important to sit with, investigators had covered approximately 95 square kilometers on foot. The total aerial and vehicle search coverage extended well beyond that. They had drained a dam. They had descended into 20-meter mine shafts. They had tracked every vehicle and every person known to have been in the area. And in all of that searching, across all of that country, they had found not one item that belonged to a 4-year-old boy. That is not what happens when a child wanders off in the outback. It is not. When a child in Noah's situation wanders, even when the outcome is tragic, even when they're never found alive, you find something. The country holds evidence. Boots leave impressions. Cotton fabric catches on wire. The absence of any physical trace across that much ground, search that thoroughly, is itself a form of evidence. It tells you something about where that child was not. And by process of elimination, it begins to narrow the question of where he might have been. Police said almost nothing about this publicly. They continue to call it a missing person case. They continue to emphasize that they were exploring all avenues. But behind that careful, professional language, the shape of the investigation was changing. On January 6, 2026, 100 days after Noah disappeared, police publicly confirmed that the family was cooperating with investigators. They said it in a press statement, which is itself an unusual thing to say. Cooperation is assumed. You don't announce it unless you're managing something that requires careful handling. And a week later, on January 14th and 15th, detectives returned to Ridgeback Station with a search warrant. They conducted what police described as a comprehensive forensic search of the homestead. They seized a vehicle, a motorcycle, and electronic devices. All of it was taken for a forensic examination. The details of that warrant and that seizure were not made public until 3 weeks later. That gap, 3 weeks of silence while forensic testing was underway, is one of the quieter but more significant moments in this case. Investigators had moved from searching the landscape to searching the structures and possessions of the people on the property. They had gone from looking for a lost child to looking for something else. On February 5th, 2026, Detective Superintendent Daniel Reeves, the officer in charge of what had by then become Task Force Horizon, stood before cameras and said what the investigation had been quietly building toward. Noah Carter's disappearance had been declared a major crime. A suspect had been identified. That suspect lived at Ridgeback Station and was known to Noah. They were not one of his parents, and they had, at some point during the investigation, withdrawn their cooperation with police. Reeves was careful with his language, as he needed to be, but what he said next was unambiguous. Police had ruled out the possibility that Noah had simply wandered off the property. They had ruled out abduction by an unknown person. There were no foreign vehicles, no foreign tracks, no dust rising above the horizon from an unrecognized car. No one on a registered sexual offenses registry had been identified near the property. Every neighbor, every worker, every visitor had been located and eliminated. We don't believe now, Reeves said, that Noah is alive. He also said there had been inconsistencies in the timelines, discrepancies in the version of events provided by family members. He said the suspect account did not align with accounts provided by others. He said the investigation had taken many twists and turns. He said the suspect now had legal representation. He said Noah's parents, Ellen and Marcus Carter, were not suspects. And then, carefully, he closed the door on further detail. There's a kind of silence that descends over a case like this at the moment it shifts from a missing child search to a major crime investigation. It's not the silence of nothing happening. It's the silence of a great deal happening behind closed doors, in forensic laboratories, in interview rooms, in the quiet accumulation of evidence that may or may not be enough to take to a court. The grandparents of Noah Carter, Robert and Diane Walsh, issued a statement through their lawyers the following day. They said they were devastated by what police had announced. They said the family had cooperated fully with the investigation. They said they wanted nothing more than to find Noah and return him to his parents. Their lawyers added, with the flat precision that legal language requires, that their clients would not be participating in any interviews and would not be commenting further. The grandmother, the woman who was the last confirmed person to see Noah alive, said nothing herself. 3 weeks after the major crime declaration, police returned to Ridgeback Station again. They searched properties adjacent to the station, including a section of national park land nearby. They said further searches would follow as new information and intelligence came to hand. Ellen Carter, Noah's mother, who had been living at the property, had by then left. First she moved to Adelaide. Then, within weeks, she left that address too. A neighbor was asked about her departure and said simply, she packed up and left. There are things in this case that we know with certainty. We know Noah Carter was seen by one witness at 5 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon. We know that same witness did not raise the alarm for 30 minutes, and that the family collectively waited 3 hours to call police. We know that one of the most extensive searches in Australian history produced not a single physical item belonging to that child. We know that a dam was drained, mine shafts were descended, 95 square kilometers were walked on foot, and the country gave up nothing. We know that police executed a warrant, seized a vehicle, a motorcycle, and electronic devices. We know that someone living at that property has been named as a suspect, has obtained legal representation, and has declined to speak with police. We know that investigators have identified what they describe as inconsistencies and discrepancies in the version of events provided by people at that property. We know that police believe Noah is dead. We do not know what happened in those 30 minutes. We do not know what those electronic devices contain. We do not know what the forensic examination of that vehicle has produced. We do not know where Noah Carter is. There are a few ways to read what the evidence tells us. The first is a charitable reading, that something happened accidentally, that the facts are exactly as unusual as they appear, and that the absence of evidence is itself inexplicable. People sometimes vanish from remote properties and are never found. It happens. The Outback is unforgiving, and the ground does not always give up what it takes. The second reading is harder to sit with. It is the reading that investigators appear to have settled on. It holds that the absence of a trace is not a mystery of geography, but a product of intent. That the inconsistencies in the timeline are not the product of a traumatized family's imperfect memories, but of something more deliberate. That the withdrawal of cooperation by a person who lived with this child and was among the last to see him is not the action of someone who has nothing to hide. Which reading is correct? That question belongs to the court, if this case ever reaches one. It belongs to forensic scientists examining a seized vehicle and electronic devices. It belongs to investigators who are, as of this moment, still searching land adjacent to property where Noah Carter was last seen. What does not belong to the court is the emotional fact at the center of this case. A 4-year-old boy went outside to play. An adult was nearby. 30 minutes passed. And then everything that followed, the helicopters, the soldiers, the drain dam, the mine shafts, the forensic warrant, the lawyers, all of it exists because of what happened in those 30 minutes that no one has yet explained. Noah Carter's parents have said publicly that their lives have been shattered. They have said that every moment without him is unbearable. They have said they know someone out there may have information. They have asked, plainly, for that person come forward. As of March 2026, no arrest has been made. Noah has not been found. There is one small, quiet detail that investigators released as part of their ongoing appeal for information. A video of Noah's clothing. The blue Minion shirt, the gray hat, the boots he was wearing that afternoon, was made public to assist searchers and witnesses in identifying any items they might have encountered. It is an unusual step in a case like this, and it tells you something about where the investigation stands. They are still looking. They have not found what they're looking for, and they believe that someone, somewhere, knows something about where to find it. Cases like this don't disappear. They just fade when people stop asking questions. This case is still active. The task force is still working. The ground at Ridgeback Station has been walked and searched and forensically examined and walked again. And somewhere in the red dust of the South Australian Outback, or in a file on one of those seized electronic devices, or in the memory of a person who has chosen not to speak, the answer to what happened to Noah Carter is waiting. If you know something, or if you've seen something, there's a way to make it known without giving your name. Crime Stoppers lines exist precisely for moments like this one. And if you've been moved by this case, if you find yourself thinking about it after you close this screen, leave a comment. Not for the algorithm, because these cases only stay alive when people refuse to let them go quiet. That's the only pressure that works. That's the only thing that has ever worked. Noah Carter was 4 years old. He was shy but curious. He wore a blue Minion shirt. He has not been found.